Step into the past with me for a moment and picture this: the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and cloves, the sound of haggling in a dozen languages, the glint of sunlight off bronze scales weighing precious metals. This was the everyday magic of ancient markets, where the world's most extraordinary treasures changed hands, and where the simple act of trade could shape the fate of empires. These weren't just places to buy and sell, they were the beating hearts of civilization, where ideas, cultures, and innovations collided. From the Silk Road's sprawling caravanserais to the crowded forums of Rome, ancient markets were more than economic hubs. They were stages for human ambition, curiosity, and connection. Think about the last time you bartered for something at a flea market or haggled over a souvenir abroad. Now multiply that energy by 1,000. And you'll start to grasp the vibrancy of these ancient trading grounds. Imagine a merchant from Alexandria unpacking bolts of Egyptian linen beside a trader from India offering sapphires the color of midnight, or a farmer from Mesopotamia selling dates and barley next to a craftsman from Greece displaying delicate pottery. Every transaction told a story of journeys across deserts and seas, of skills passed down through generations, of luxuries that traveled farther than most people ever would. These markets were where the world felt both vast and strangely small, where a single coin could link someone in Athens to a miner in Afghanistan or a weaver in China. What's truly astonishing is how much these ancient exchanges still echo in our lives today. That spice rack in your kitchen, those flavors once crossed continents on the backs of camels. The silk scarf in your closet, its ancestor might have been traded for its weight in gold. In this video, we'll unravel the hidden histories behind the goods that fueled empires, from the everyday to the extraordinary. You'll discover how a humble peppercorn sparked global exploration, why purple dye was worth more than silver, and how a marketplace in Baghdad could feel like the center of the universe. So let's wander these ancient stalls together, because every item has a tale, and every trade reveals something surprising about who we are. Long before the first coins jingled in a merchant's purse or the first contracts were etched into clay, humans found ways to trade not just goods, but trust, ingenuity, and glimpses of distant worlds. The earliest markets weren't grand bazaars, but humble gatherings under open skies, where farmers from neighboring villages met to swap surplus barley for flint tools or woven baskets. Picture the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers around 5,000 years ago, where the rhythm of seasons dictated life. After harvests, families would come together, laying out their wares on woven mats, their voices rising in a chorus of offers and counteroffers. No money changed hands. Value was measured in usefulness: a jar of honey for a length of linen, a sack of lentils for a finely carved obsidian blade. What began as simple barter soon transformed into something revolutionary. As settlements grew into cities like and Uruk, these informal exchanges became formalized, with designated spaces near temples or city gates. Why temples? Because in ancient Mesopotamia, trade and spirituality were intertwined. A thriving market was seen as a sign of the gods' favor, a belief echoed in cultures from Egypt to the Indus Valley. Archaeologists have found cuneiform tablets detailing transactions as mundane as a dozen onions traded for fish, and as extraordinary as lapis lazuli, a stone mined only in Afghanistan turning up in royal tombs thousands of miles away. This was globalization in its infancy, proof that even then, no society thrived in isolation. The real game changer came with the invention of writing, born not from poetry or prophecy, but from the practical need to record debts and trades. Those early receipts scratched into clay tablets were the birth certificates of commerce, allowing deals to stretch across time and space. Imagine a merchant in Babylon trusting that a shipment of cedar wood from Lebanon would arrive because the contract was sealed with a cylinder roll pressed into wet clay. Markets became more than places, they were systems fueled by trust and innovation. And as trade routes expanded, so did the menu of marvels on offer. Spices from the Malabar coast, amber from the Baltic, silk spun by worms fed on mulberry leaves in far-off China. Yet for all their sophistication, these ancient markets faced challenges any modern vendor would recognize. How do you ensure fair weights and measures? The Code of Hammurabi, one of history's earliest legal texts, prescribed harsh penalties for merchants caught tampering with bronze scales. How do you bridge language barriers? Traders developed pidgin dialects and hand signals, a universal language of raised fingers and clasped wrists. And perhaps most strikingly, how do you build trust with someone you'll never see again? The answer lay in reputation, sealed with personal seals pressed into clay, and in the unspoken rules of hospitality that turned strangers into partners. These ancient marketplaces were more than economic engines. They were humanity's first social networks, where news, gossip, and ideas spread as fast as the goods themselves. A potter might learn a new glaze technique from a traveler, while a scribe could pick up rumors of unrest in a neighboring kingdom. In this way, markets became crucibles of culture, where the exchange of goods quietly shaped the exchange of worldviews. From the docks of Mohenjo-Daro to the Agora of Athens, they proved that trade wasn't just about what changed hands, but what changed minds. If those early Mesopotamian markets were the first sparks of trade, the Silk Road was the blaze that lit up the ancient world. Picture a caravan of 200 camels plodding through the Taklamakan desert, their loads swaying with bundles of silk so light yet so valuable, they were worth more than gold by weight. This wasn't just a route, it was a lifeline weaving together empires from the Han Dynasty to Rome, a staggering 4,000 miles of deserts, mountains, and bustling oasis towns. But silk, for all its fame, was just the beginning. A single caravan might carry jade from cotton, pepper from India, Roman glassware, and Persian carpets, each item a testament to how far people would go to possess the rare and the exquisite. The real magic of the Silk Road wasn't just in the goods, though. It was in the invisible cargo, ideas that traveled faster than any camel. Buddhist monks from India carried scriptures along these routes, their teachings taking root in China's caves at Dunhuang, where stunning murals still tell their stories. Papermaking, a closely guarded Chinese secret, slipped westward after a battle in Central Asia, eventually revolutionizing how the world recorded knowledge. Even culinary traditions crisscrossed continents. Saffron from Persia flavored royal feasts in Chang'an, while Chinese noodles found new homes in Italian kitchens. These exchanges didn't just fill coffers, they reshaped religions, arts, and even the way people ate. Yet for all its glamour, the Silk Road was no pleasure cruise. Merchants faced the Taklamakan's Sea of Death, where shifting sands swallowed entire caravans, and the Pamir Mountains, Trail of Bones, named for the animals and men who didn't survive the thin air. Bandits lurked in narrow gorges, and tolls at city gates could wipe out profits in an instant. So why risk it? Because the rewards were staggering. A single bolt of Chinese silk, unspooled into threads and rewoven in Syrian workshops, could fetch 10 times its original price in Rome. Spices like cloves, which grew only on a handful of Indonesian islands, became status symbols in Europe, worth their weight in silver. What's striking is how these ancient traders solved problems we still grapple with today. Without banks, they used letters of credit, a piece of paper promising payment in another city, honored by merchant networks stretching from Samarkand to Venice. They dealt with counterfeit goods too. Roman historians grumbled about shady dealers dyeing cheap wool to pass it off as silk. And just like modern supply chains, the Silk Road had its choke points. The bustling market of Kashgar, where routes from India and Persia converged, was the ancient equivalent of a major shipping hub. Control it, and you controlled the flow of wealth across continents. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Silk Road is how it redefined borders. The Han dynasty sent envoys west not for conquest but for trade, seeking the heavenly horses of Fergana to strengthen their cavalry. In return, Central Asian kings coveted Chinese ironware and lacquer. This wasn't just commerce, it was diplomacy in action, proving that even rival empires had more to gain from exchange than from conflict. Today, as container ships follow sea routes mapped by ancient traders and digital marketplaces connect buyers worldwide, we're still living in the world the Silk Road built, a world where a merchant's daring, a weaver's skill, and a scholar's curiosity can bridge distances we once thought impossible. Walk through the arched entrances of Trajan's market in ancient Rome, and you'd step into a world of sensory overload, vendors shouting prices over the din of shuffling sandals, the tang of fermenting fish sauce mingling with the sweetness of fresh figs, the vibrant colors of imported silks draped beside stacks of locally made pottery. This wasn't just a marketplace, it was a microcosm of Rome's sprawling empire, where the fruits of conquest and the ingenuity of commerce collided. Built into the slopes of Rome's Quirinal Hill, Trajan's market was a revolutionary feat of architecture, a multi-level shopping complex with over 150 shops, offices, and even apartments. Think of it as the ancient world's first shopping mall, where a senator's wife could browse perfumes from Arabia while a slave haggled over the price of lentils nearby. What made Roman markets truly extraordinary was their sheer variety. At the Forum Boreum, the city's oldest cattle market, farmers from the countryside would drive oxen and sheep past temples dedicated to Hercules, their hides dusty from the journey. Just a short walk away, the Forum Holatorium overflowed with sacks of grain, bundles of leeks, and pyramids of olives, feeding a city whose population swelled to over 1 million at its peak. But the real luxury items, those came from the empire's farthest edges. A wealthy patrician might send a servant to procure Spanish olive oil, shipped in massive clay amphorae stamped with the producer's name, like an ancient brand logo, or a jar of garum, the fermented fish sauce Romans drizzled on everything from eggs to dormice. This pungent condiment, made in coastal factories from Portugal to Pompeii, was so beloved that its producers graded it like modern olive oil, with the finest varieties aged like wine. Yet Roman markets weren't just about sustenance, they were theaters of spectacle. At the height of the empire, exotic animals from Africa and Asia paraded through the streets before meeting their fate in the Colosseum. A merchant might advertise a shipment of Indian tigers with painted signs, while a dealer from Carthage offered rare parrots whose feathers would adorn wealthy women's hairstyles. Even the tools of everyday life told a story of global trade. A stylus for writing might be fashioned from British tin, the ink from Egyptian soot, and the wax tablets from Cyprian beeswax. What held this bustling system together? Rome's unmatched infrastructure. The empire's roads, over 250,000 miles of them, from Scotland to Syria, allowed grain shipments to reach the capital in weeks, not months. Ports like Ostia buzzed with cranes unloading Egyptian grain, Greek marble, and Syrian glass, while standardized weights and measures kept transactions fair. The Romans even had a primitive form of consumer protection. Edicts fixed prices for everything from Egyptian linen to North African lumber, preventing inflation during shortages. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Rome's markets was their role as social equalizers. In the shadow of the Capitoline Hill, a freedman might rub shoulders with an equestrian, both bargaining over the same Tunisian dates. Senators fresh from debates in the Curia could be spotted sampling oysters from Brittany, their political rivalries momentarily forgotten. Markets were where gossip traveled faster than official messengers, where whispers of barbarian uprisings or imperial scandals spread between sips of Falernian wine. In this way, Rome's markets weren't just fueling the empire's economy, they were weaving the fabric of its society, proving that commerce could build something far greater than wealth. It could build a civilization. The Nile was ancient Egypt's beating heart, and its markets pulsed with the rhythm of the river's annual floods. Picture the docks of Thebes at dawn, barges heavy with golden grain from the delta bumping against wooden piers, while traders from Nubia unload ebony and ivory beside sacks of frankincense from Punt. Unlike the sprawling bazaars of Rome or the Silk Road's caravan stops, Egyptian markets were intimate yet no less vital. Their stalls clustered near temple complexes or along riverbanks where the water's edge became a natural counter for exchange. Here, a farmer might trade emmer wheat for a copper chisel, while a priest weighed out rings of silver for myrrh to burn before the gods. What made these markets extraordinary was their deep ties to the land itself. The Nile's predictable floods created surpluses that fueled trade: barley for beer, flax for linen so fine it was called woven moonlight. Papyrus, the empire's paper, grew in the marshes like a weed but became a luxury export, shipped as far as Rome for scribes and senators. Yet the real currency wasn't coins at first, it was trust, sealed with carved stone weights shaped like ducks or bulls, their heft standardized by royal decree. A merchant might place a weight on one side of a scale and pile grain on the other until the balance tipped true, a ritual unchanged for millennia. Temples weren't just backdrops for trade, they were active participants. At Karnak, priests swapped offerings of honey and wine for rare cedar from Lebanon to build sacred barks, while in Memphis, potters shaped vessels stamped with the cartouch of Pharaoh, destined to hold offerings in the afterlife. Even the humblest market goods carried divine echoes. Turquoise from Sign I became amulets to ward off evil, while lapis lazuli, hauled across deserts from Afghanistan, was ground into pigment to paint the eyes of statues, as if the gods themselves required cosmetics. The Nile's currents connected Egypt to worlds beyond its borders. Upstream, Nubian traders arrived with gold dust measured in Deben, a weight roughly equal to a handful of grain, and exotic animal skins. Downriver, Phoenician ships brought silver from Anatolia and vivid glass beads crafted to mimic precious stones. One surviving ledger from Deir el-Medina records a startling transaction. A Nubian mercenary paid for a burial plot with a cow, a bed, and 5 lengths of Syrian bronze. It's a reminder that value was fluid, shaped by need as much as rarity. Perhaps nothing captures the spirit of these markets better than the tale of Wenamun, a priest sent to buy cedar during hard times. His report reads like a merchant's thriller: shipwrecks, price gouging, and a prince who demanded payment upfront despite Wenamun's claim that Ammon himself is my guarantee. The story reveals the raw pragmatism beneath Egypt's divine facade. Even faith had its limits when goods were at stake, yet it also shows how trade could bridge cultures. When Wenamun finally secured his wood, it was through an act of mutual respect, not force, proving that the Nile's greatest gift wasn't just its water, but the connections it carried between people, from peasant to pharaoh. At the crack of dawn in Athens, the Agora already hummed with life. Olive vendors arranging their clay amphorae, fishmongers splashing seawater over glistening catches from the Aegean, and a potter from Corinth unpacking wares painted with scenes of gods and heroes. But what set Greek markets apart wasn't just the goods, it was the buzz of conversation swirling around them. In one corner, a group of sandal-clad men clustered around Socrates as he probed, "What is justice?" While nearby, a merchant from Phoenicia haggled over the price of Tyrian purple dye. This seamless blend of commerce and philosophy wasn't accidental. To the Greeks, the Agora was democracy in action, a place where the exchange of goods and ideas proved that every citizen, whether farmer or philosopher, had a voice. The layout of the Agora itself reflected this balance. Stoa-covered colonnades lined the square, offering shade to both spice sellers and students listening to lectures by Aristotle's successors. Temples stood shoulder to shoulder with butcher stalls, their altars perfumed by roasting meat and incense. Even the merchandise told a story of cultural crossroads. A wealthy Athenian might purchase Egyptian papyrus for recording plays, sip wine from Thrace served in a cup crafted by enslaved Scythian metalworkers, and drape themselves in a cloak woven from Sicilian wool. Every transaction was a thread in the fabric of Mediterranean life, connecting distant shores through shared needs and desires. What's striking is how these markets fueled intellectual revolutions. When a ship from Miletus docked at Piraeus with a cargo of figs and geometry scrolls, it wasn't just the figs that found buyers. The philosopher Anaxagoras, accused of impiety for calling the sun a red-hot stone, likely honed his ideas by observing traders who'd seen foreign gods and customs. Meanwhile, playwrights like Aristophanes mined the Agora's chatter for material, turning fish sellers' cries into comic verses that skewered politicians. This constant cross-pollination of practical and abstract thinking gave birth to concepts we still live by, from civic debate to economic theory. The Agora's vitality relied on meticulous organization. Public slaves known as market overseers checked weights and measures, their bronze standards stamped with the owl of Athena. Water clocks timed speeches in nearby courts, ensuring even justice had its price, a drachma per hour for a lawyer's services. Seasonal markets blossomed like clockwork. The month of Poseidon brought salted tuna from the Black Sea, while Dionysia festival crowds devoured roasted chestnuts and honey cakes. But beneath this order thrived beautiful chaos. A Spartan envoy might grimace at Athenian decadence while sampling Rhodian raisins, unaware that his own city's iron bars, Sparta's bulky currency, were becoming obsolete in this world of silver coins and credit notes. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Agora was its proof that commerce and culture need not compete. The same merchants who funded Euripides' tragedies also bankrolled triremes to defend Athens. The clay lamps lighting evening debates were identical to those in fishermen's huts. In this shared space, the fish seller and the philosopher both understood something profound, that the measure of a society isn't just what it buys and sells, but what it chooses to value, and how loudly it dares to question those choices under the open Mediterranean sky. Imagine holding a handful of barley in your palm, not just as food, but as money. In the sun-baked streets of this humble grain was the lifeblood of trade, measured out in precise portions to buy everything from pottery to precious metals. Mesopotamians didn't just barter, they invented one of history's first standardized currencies, with a shekel of barley serving as the equivalent of a dollar bill. But what made this system revolutionary wasn't the grain itself, it was the meticulous fairness behind it. Scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets with cuneiform script, detailing exchanges like 30 measures of barley for 1 goat, or 5 shekels of silver for a cedar beam from Lebanon. These weren't casual notes, they were legally binding contracts, some even bearing witness signatures pressed into the clay by bystanders' fingernails. Step into the shadow of a ziggurat in Babylon, and you'd find more than just priests. You'd encounter the world's earliest bankers. Temples doubled as economic hubs, their storerooms stacked with sacks of grain, jars of oil, and ingots of copper, all carefully inventoried. Need a loan to plant next season's crops? A priest banker might advance you barley with interest to be repaid after harvest. Even the concept of credit wasn't foreign. Tablets reveal merchants arranging delayed payments or trading promises like modern promissory notes. The system was so sophisticated that Hammurabi's code, carved into an 8-foot stone pillar, included laws capping interest rates at 33% for grain loans, proving that financial regulation is far from a modern idea. What truly set Mesopotamia apart was its appetite for the exotic. A single cuneiform receipt might list wool from Sumerian sheep, lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan, and cedar floated down the Euphrates from distant Lebanon. These goods didn't just appear magically, they traveled on donkey caravans covering 20 miles a day, their routes patrolled by guards paid in barley and beer. At the docks of ships from Dilmun, modern Bahrain, unloaded pearls and ivory, while traders from the Indus Valley brought carnelian beads so vibrant they seemed to hold fire within. The scale was staggering. One tablet records a shipment of 20,000 liters of grain, enough to feed a small city. Yet for all its complexity, this system relied on something beautifully simple: trust. A merchant's personal seal, a carved cylinder rolled onto wet clay, was his signature, his reputation, his bond. Lose that seal, and you might as well lose your livelihood. Archaeologists have found dispute tablets where traders argued over missing donkeys or underweight silver, resolved by councils of elders weighing evidence like proto-judges. Even theft had its own bureaucracy. One tablet from Larsa details a robbery of copper tools, complete with a list of suspects and the ominous note, "Let the guilty one replace tenfold." The legacy of these markets echoes in every wallet and spreadsheet today. When Mesopotamians stamped their seals on contracts, they were inventing the idea of legal commerce. When they priced a jar of oil in barley equivalents, they laid the groundwork for universal value systems. And when temple scribes tracked debts across generations, they were unwittingly creating the first ledgers, precursors to modern accounting. This wasn't just trade, it was the dawn of an economic mindset that would fuel empires from Rome to Wall Street, proving that the true currency of civilization isn't silver or grain, but the collective belief that a promise pressed into clay or printed on paper is worth something. Beneath the sun-scorched plains of modern Pakistan and India lies the ghost of a marketplace so advanced, it rivaled the bazaars of Mesopotamia and Egypt, yet today few could name it. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago, built cities like Mohenjo-Daro with grid-paved streets wide enough for ox carts to deliver goods, and drains so efficient they put medieval Europe to shame. But it wasn't just infrastructure that set these markets apart, it was their startling egalitarianism. While pharaohs hoarded gold and Mesopotamian kings demanded lapis lazuli, Indus traders dealt in humbler treasures. Cotton so finely woven it felt like mist, carnelian beads gleaming like pomegranate seeds, and pottery stamped with unicorn motifs that still puzzle archaeologists. Walk through the ruins of Harappa's marketplace, and you'll find no grand temples overshadowing the stalls, no palaces looming over transactions. Instead, standardized cubical weights carved from chert and perfectly matched across cities hundreds of miles apart hint at a society where fairness mattered more than flaunting wealth. A merchant selling lentils would use the same weight system as one trading ivory, their scales balanced against tiny stone cubes weighing precisely 1.36 grams. This wasn't just precision, it was a radical idea that commerce should serve everyone from the weaver to the water carrier. The real marvel, though, lies in what archaeologists haven't found. Unlike Egyptian tombs bursting with golden chariots or Mesopotamian hoards of silver, the Indus Valley yields few lavish grave goods. Their wealth flowed differently, into public wells that served all citizens, into clay pipes channeling clean water to neighborhoods, into stamp seals used by ordinary traders to mark bales of cotton bound for distant shores. Those seals, carved with bulls, elephants, and cryptic script, tell a silent story of globalization. Found in Mesopotamian ruins, they prove Indus cotton-clothed Sumerian priests, while Mesopotamian silver trickled back in return. Imagine the journey, bales leaving Lothal's docks on reed boats, sailing past Oman's copper-rich mountains, reaching Ur's markets where merchants marveled at fabric lighter than linen. What truly fascinates isn't just what they traded, but how. No evidence of swords or fortifications crowds these ruins. No murals glorify conquest. Instead, clay toys and dice suggest markets where children played underfoot as deals were struck. The Indus people may have pioneered something rare in the ancient world: commerce without coercion, where goods moved through agreement rather than tribute. Even their decline holds clues. As droughts parched the Gagga-Hakra River, traders adapted, shifting routes toward the Ganges rather than waging wars for water. Today, as we sift through their ruins, we're left with a tantalizing question. Was theirs a model that valued resilience over riches, community over kings? In a world where other civilizations measured worth in gold and monuments, the Indus Valley built its legacy in perfect brick ratios and the quiet hum of a marketplace where every weight was fair, every voice perhaps counted. Their greatest export wasn't cotton or carnelian, but a fleeting vision of trade as something that could lift not just the few, but the many. In the heart of Chang'an, the Tang dynasty's capital, a Persian merchant's eyes would widen at the sight of treasures unimaginable in his homeland. Delicate celadon porcelain glazed the color of jade, rolls of paper smoother than parchment, and bolts of silk so luminous they seemed spun from moonlight. This was no ordinary marketplace. It was the epicenter of a trade network stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, where China's most coveted exports flowed like water. Silk wasn't just a fabric here, it was currency, diplomacy, and power woven into threads. Emperors gifted entire rolls to nomadic chieftains to secure borders, while monks smuggled silkworm cocoons in hollow staffs, breaking China's monopoly and sparking industries as far away as Constantinople. But silk was merely the glittering surface of China's commercial genius. Step into a Song Dynasty night market, and you'd find a world that never slept: lanterns bobbing above stalls serving dumplings steaming with pork and ginger, performers juggling fire beside storytellers reciting tales of dragon slayers, and scholars haggling over inkstones while merchants weighed silver flakes for tea bricks stamped with imperial seals. These weren't just places to shop. They were sensory symphonies where commerce, culture, and cuisine collided. The government's hand was everywhere but rarely heavy. Standardized Huoki certificates guaranteed a merchant's right to trade, while market inspectors patrolled with bamboo rods to punish those selling watered-down wine or underweight grain. What truly set China apart was its ability to turn everyday goods into global obsessions. Take tea, once a bitter medicinal brew in Sichuan monasteries. By the Tang era, it had become a social ritual so refined that Lu Yu's classic of tea dictated everything from water temperature, never boiling, to the ideal cup's celadon hue. Caravans bound for Tibet carried compressed tea bricks used as currency, while Japanese envoys smuggled seeds home like state secrets. Even paper, invented to replace cumbersome bamboo scrolls, revolutionized markets by making contracts portable and literacy accessible. A single shipment to Samarkand could contain poetry scrolls, waterproof umbrellas, and iron plows, each item a testament to China's knack for blending utility with artistry. Beneath this vibrancy lay an intricate dance between control and chaos. The government operated guilds, regulating everything from spice prices to the width of silk looms, yet entrepreneurial spirit thrived. A merchant in Gwangju might partner with Arab shipbuilders to craft hybrid vessels, Chinese compasses guiding Persian sails, while in Gwangju, foreign traders lived in self-governed enclaves, their mosques and temples standing testament to commerce's ability to bridge worlds. When Marco Polo marveled at Hangzhou's 10,000 bridges and firework-lit barges, he was witnessing not just wealth, but a marketplace that had perfected the alchemy of tradition and innovation. The legacy of these markets pulses through modern Shanghai's neon-lit bazaars and Alibaba's digital storefronts alike. From the Silk Road's camel bells to the clink of teacups in a Tang-era tavern, China proved that trade isn't just about moving goods, it's about weaving connections so enduring they outlast empires. The Sahara wasn't just a desert, it was a golden highway. Picture a caravan of 1,000 camels swaying single file across dunes, their backs laden with slabs of salt cut from mines deep beneath the earth. At Taghaza, a settlement built entirely from salt blocks, miners toiled in darkness, chiseling out pieces so pure they could be carved like stone. But the real marvel wasn't the salt itself, it was where it was headed. Southward, across blistering sands to the markets of Timbuktu, where merchants from the Mali Empire waited with sacks of gold dust painstakingly panned from the Niger River's bends. Ounce for ounce, these two commodities, one vital for survival, the other a symbol of power, created an economic alchemy that fueled empires. Mansa Musa, Mali's legendary ruler, understood this balance better than anyone. When he embarked on his Hajj to Mecca in 1324, his caravan didn't just carry gold, it was gold. 60,000 porters and servants accompanied him, each clutching staffs of solid gold, while camels bore hundreds of pounds of gold dust to be scattered along the route. The spectacle was so staggering it crashed Cairo's gold market for years. Yet what often goes untold is how this wealth was forged not through conquest, but through markets so sophisticated they rivaled Venice's. In Timbuktu's Sankor district, scholars haggled over Greek manuscripts alongside Tuareg traders, their negotiations recorded on parchment in ink made from crushed indigo. The city's great mosque, its wooden beams lashed together with camel leather, stood as testament to a trade network stretching from the Mediterranean to the rainforests. Meanwhile, on Africa's opposite coast, the Kingdom of Axum wrote its own chapter in the annals of commerce. Perched atop the Ethiopian highlands, Axumite merchants tapped into monsoons to sail to India and back, their ships heavy with frankincense, ivory, and live elephants, luxuries coveted by Persian kings and Roman emperors. Their currency, coins struck with the profiles of rulers like King Indubis, the first sub-Saharan monarch to mint gold money bearing his face. These weren't just tokens of trade, they were propaganda, announcing Axum's arrival on the world stage. What tied these kingdoms together was more than just goods. It was a shared understanding of value beyond extraction. In Mali, gold wasn't hoarded in vaults but woven into the social fabric, given as dowries or transformed into intricate jewelry that told family histories. Salt, too, held cultural weight. Tuareg traders carried amulets filled with salt from sacred mines, believing it held baraka, divine blessing. Even the caravans themselves moved to rhythms older than currency, guided by stars and songs passed down through generations of desert nomads. When Ibn Battuta described Mali's markets as the most secure place on earth for merchants, he wasn't just praising their wealth, he was honoring a system built on trust. A trader from Cairo could advance goods to a partner in Gao with nothing but a whispered promise, knowing the debt would be honored seasons later. This was globalization with a human face, where profit and kinship walked hand in hand. Long before Wall Street or the Silk Road, Africa's golden networks proved that commerce at its best doesn't just move goods, it weaves worlds together. When Cortés and his soldiers first laid eyes on Tlatelolco's marketplace, they struggled to comprehend the scale. 60,000 traders moving through a space larger than 10 football fields, their voices rising in a hum that could be heard from the temples above. What stunned the Spaniards wasn't just the crowds, but the meticulous order. Vendors arranged by specialty, from the golden glow of ripe maize to the iridescent shimmer of quetzal feathers, each section patrolled by officials who tested cocoa beans for counterfeits by biting down to hear the telltale crunch of authenticity. This was commerce as high art, where the act of trade was woven into the very fabric of cosmic belief. Take cocoa beans, for instance, small enough to fit in a child's palm, yet mighty enough to buy a slave's freedom. These weren't just currency, they were sacred offerings ground into frothy drinks spiced with chilies and vanilla for rituals honoring Ekchuaj, the Mayan god of trade. A merchant might pay 5 beans for a turkey egg, 100 for a woven blanket, or 300 for the ultimate luxury, a jade bead carved with the face of a jaguar. The beans traveled vast distances, from the steamy lowlands where cacao trees thrived to the highland markets of Tenochtitlan, their value carefully preserved in woven baskets sealed with beeswax. Obsidian tells another tale. Mined from volcanic glass deposits and traded across Mesoamerica, this razor-sharp stone was the steel of its time, transformed into blades for ritual bloodletting, tools for shaping jade, and weapons that could fell a deer with a single throw. At the Mayan city of Tikal, archaeologists found obsidian from sources hundreds of miles away, proof of networks stretching beyond political borders. Yet what's striking is how these goods moved. Without horses or wheeled carts, everything, from sacks of salt harvested in coastal lagoons to bundles of cotton, dyed with cochineal insects, traveled on the backs of human porters called tileme. A single porter could carry 50 pounds for 15 miles a day, their sandaled feet tracing paths worn smooth by generations before them. The markets themselves pulsed with spiritual significance. Before dawn, priests blessed the stalls with copal incense, its smoke curling skyward to invite the gods' favor. A merchant selling macaw feathers might whisper prayers to Quetzalcoatl, while a farmer offering squash blossoms laid them carefully on a mat woven with symbols of fertility. Even disputes were resolved under divine gaze. Theft could mean enslavement, but an honest trader might be rewarded with a copper axe or a cloak of rabbit fur, status symbols declaring their integrity. What the Spanish failed to grasp was that these weren't just places of exchange, they were living maps of the Mesoamerican worldview. The layout mirrored the cosmos, the salt cellars at the western edge like the setting sun, the feathered dealers to the east where dawn painted the sky in hues of scarlet and gold. When a mother traded her pottery for medicinal herbs, she wasn't just bartering. She was participating in a cycle as old as the first maize harvest, where every transaction strengthened the bonds between earth and heaven. In a land without metal coins or written contracts, trust was etched into the very stones of the marketplace, and the gods themselves stood witness. Picture a Roman banquet where guests recline on cushioned couches, their plates piled high with roasted peacock and honeyed dormice. Now imagine their outrage if someone dared to serve these delicacies unseasoned, because in the ancient world, food without spices was like music without melody. A single pound of pepper could cost a Roman laborer 4 months' wages, while cinnamon sticks from Sri Lanka were so precious they were stored alongside royal jewels. But why would anyone pay a fortune for something as fleeting as flavor? The answer lies in the alchemy of scarcity and desire. Spices didn't just tickle palates. They whispered of distant jungles, of monsoon winds carrying ships past uncharted shores, of entire economies built on the aroma of a dried berry. The story begins not in bustling ports but in silent tombs. Ancient Egyptians paid exorbitant sums for myrrh and cassia to anoint their dead, believing these resins could purify souls for the afterlife. A single pharaoh's burial might require over a ton of imported spices, their fragrance masking decay as workers wrapped mummies in linen strips. But it was the Romans who turned spice consumption into an obsession. Pliny the Elder grumbled that Rome wasted 50 million sesterces yearly on Eastern luxuries, draining silver reserves to flavor wine with malabathrum leaves or preserve fish with asafoetida. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii, archaeologists later found peppercorns still lodged between kitchen tiles, testaments to a taste so universal it survived catastrophe. Arab traders mastered the art of mystery to keep prices sky-high. They spun wild tales to conceal origins. Cinnamon grew in valleys guarded by winged serpents, they claimed, while pepper vines thrived in forests patrolled by fire-breathing dragons. Merchants in Alexandria's spice souks might display goods but never reveal their sources, creating a Middle Eastern monopoly that lasted centuries. One clever tactic involved soaking cassia bark in seawater to make it heavier and more expensive by weight. The ruse worked so well that when European explorers finally reached India's Malabar coast, they were stunned to find pepper growing openly on vines, not mined from mythical caves. This hunger for flavor literally redrew the world map. When Vasco da Gama rounded Africa's Cape of Good Hope in 1498, his crew wasn't searching for territory or converts. They were hunting black pepper sauce. Columbus, convinced he'd reached India, mislabeled Caribbean chilies as peppers in his haste to claim a spice route. The Dutch would later wage genocidal wars over nutmeg islands in Indonesia, while Portuguese caravels stacked cinnamon bark so high it threatened to capsize ships. Entire cities rose and fell on this trade. Venice grew fat taxing spice caravans, only to crumble when sailors bypassed its docks for ocean routes. What's astonishing is how these tiny commodities reshaped societies. Medieval apothecaries prescribed pepper for everything from lethargy to plague, while brides in Bengal received cloves as dowries. The Hanseatic League, a powerhouse of German merchants, built its wealth on Baltic herring preserved with Indian spices. Even language bears spices imprint. The word salary traces back to Roman soldiers paid in salt allowances, while peppercorn rent still denotes nominal payments in British law. From the incense trails of Arabia to the clove-stuffed pillows of Chinese emperors, the pursuit of flavor proved that commerce could be as intoxicating as the spices themselves. A reminder that sometimes history's most pivotal journeys begin with nothing more than the craving for a taste of the unknown. In the Kingdom of Lydia, nestled between the Aegean coast and the rugged highlands of Anatolia, a revolution began with a simple act: a merchant pressing the king's lion emblem into a lump of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. This unassuming disc, stamped around 600 BC, became the world's first official coin, transforming trade from a barter of guesswork into a system of guaranteed value. Suddenly, a farmer selling olives in Sardis could pocket these gleaming tokens, knowing they'd be accepted for wheat in the next town over. The Lydians didn't just invent money, they invented trust in portable, uniform form, a concept so powerful it would fuel empires. Gold's allure, though, stretches back far earlier. Along the Nile's sun-baked shores, Nubian miners toiled in pits deeper than 10 men standing shoulder to shoulder, their hammers chipping away at quartz veins to free flecks of the divine metal. Pharaohs called it the flesh of the gods, and for good reason. The gold sheathing Tutankhamun's sarcophagus alone weighed over 240 pounds, a shimmering testament to Egypt's wealth. But this wasn't just vanity. Gold's incorruptibility made it the ultimate diplomatic tool. When Thutmose Roman III needed to sway rebellious Levantine princes, he sent gold rings and necklaces, not soldiers. A single chest of Nubian gold could buy loyalty more reliably than an army. Silver, meanwhile, became the lifeblood of empires with less glamour but equal might. In the mines of Rio Tinto, Spanish slaves worked underground rivers turned acidic by ore extraction, their backs bent under the weight of silver-laden rocks. This wasn't just mining, it was industrial-scale wealth production. By the 1st century CE, Spain's silver funded Rome's legions, its denarii coins circulating from Britannia to Babylon. The metal's value was so consistent that a Roman soldier's salary, roughly 300 denarii a year, could be counted on to buy the same amount of grain in Gaul as it did in Alexandria. Silver didn't just grease the wheels of trade, it built the roads themselves, yet precious metals were never just crude measures of wealth. In the hands of Minoan artisans on Crete, gold became delicate bees suspended in pendants, their wings thin as petals. The Scythians of the steppes turned Siberian gold into stag figurines so lifelike they seemed ready to bolt. And in China's Zhou dynasty, bronze, often overshadowed by its flashier cousins, was cast into ceremonial vessels inscribed with poetry, blending commerce with spirituality. A single Shang dynasty cauldron might exchange hands for a dozen horses, not for its material value but for the ancestral blessings it was believed to hold. The true legacy of these metals lies in the paradox they embody, rare enough to be coveted yet malleable enough to shape civilizations. When Croesus, Lydia's last king, boasted his gold made him the wealthiest man alive, he wasn't wrong, but he missed the deeper truth. Gold and silver didn't just reflect power, they created it, enabling everything from Athenian democracy, funded by Laurium's silver mines, to the Silk Road's sprawling exchanges. Today, when central banks stockpile gold reserves or a jeweler weighs a wedding ring, they're participating in a system forged not in Wall Street's canyons, but in the dusty marketplaces of Sardis, the torchlit tunnels of Nubia, and the mint houses where metal met meaning. Consider the weight of a single thread, fragile on its own, yet when woven together, capable of draping empires in splendor or binding continents through commerce. Egyptian linen, spun from flax plants soaked in the Nile's muddy banks, was so finely woven it became translucent, a fabric fit for both pharaohs and temple veils. Workers in the shadow of the pyramids bleached bolts of cloth in the desert sun, their hands moving with rhythms passed down through generations. But this wasn't just local craftsmanship. Egyptian linen traveled on Phoenician ships to clothe Greek aristocrats and was traded deep into Nubia for ebony and incense. The secret lay in the weave. Some fragments found in tombs boast over 500 threads per inch, a density unmatched until the Industrial Revolution. Then there was purple, not just a color but a proclamation of power. On the rocky shores of Tyre, harvesters braved treacherous tides to collect murex sea snails by the thousands. It took 12,000 snails to yield a single gram of dye, a process so foul-smelling that workshops were banished to cities' outskirts. Yet the result, a hue shifting between ruby and violet in sunlight, became Rome's ultimate status symbol. Senators paid fortunes for stripes on their togas, while emperors forbade commoners from wearing it entirely. The dye's rarity birthed an entire economy of imitation. Merchants hawked counterfeit purple made from cheaper lichen, risking imprisonment if caught. Meanwhile, in the Indian subcontinent, cotton grew so luxuriantly that Greek explorers dubbed it the wool of trees. farmers in the Indus Valley perfected techniques to card and spin fibers into fabrics so breathable they became Rome's hottest import during sweltering summers. A single shipment from the port of Barley could contain muslin sheer enough to slip through a ring, alongside block-printed cloth dyed with indigo so vibrant it never faded. Indian textiles even sparked one of history's first recorded trade disputes. Roman senators complained their silver was draining east to pay for what they saw as frivolous finery. But textiles weren't just commodities, they were canvases for cultural exchange. Chinese silk, smuggled out of the empire by Nestorian monks hidden in their staffs, transformed Persian weavers' designs with motifs of phoenixes and dragons. Byzantine workshops in Constantinople reverse-engineered silk threads to create shimmering ecclesiastical robes, while Andean weavers in South America encoded myths into alpaca wool tapestries using knots as precise as binary code. A single length of cloth could tell you who harvested its fibers, who spun its threads, and who bartered for it beneath desert stars or monsoon rains. What's astonishing is how these fabrics transcended their material form. In Mesoamerica, Mayan nobles wore capes of quetzal feathers woven into cotton backings, their iridescence signaling divine favor. Viking traders measured wealth not just in silver but in the meter-long strips of woven wool called vathmol, used as currency across Scandinavia. Even burial rites wove textiles into the afterlife. Celtic chieftains were laid to rest in Chinese silk, their tombs bridging continents in death. From the looms of antiquity to the algorithms of modern fast fashion, the thread connecting us all remains spun from the same human desires to adorn, to belong, and to tell stories without saying a word. A Roman soldier marching through Germania might have carried a sack of wheat from Egypt, while a peasant in the Yangtze Delta cooked millet harvested from terraced hillsides, a proof that ancient markets didn't just feed people. They connected them across continents through the universal language of hunger and flavor. Take garum, that pungent Roman fish sauce beloved from Britannia to Babylon. Factories along the Iberian coast fermented mackerel guts in the Mediterranean sun for months, straining the resulting liquid into amphorae stamped with the producer's name like ancient gourmet brands. A single shipment could contain 40,000 liters, its umami richness transforming even the humblest barley porridge into a taste of empire. Yet this wasn't just cuisine, it was chemistry. Archaeologists found garum residues in Pompeii's sewers, revealing how a condiment could outlast the volcano that buried it. Meanwhile, in the Fertile Crescent, barley was more than sustenance, it was the backbone of civilization. Mesopotamian merchants traded it by the shekel, its value so consistent it became an early form of currency. Temple breweries in Sumer turned this humble grain into beer so revered it was offered to gods and workers alike. A cuneiform tablet from details a tavern keeper punished for watering down her brew, proving that quality control is no modern obsession. Over in the Nile Delta, bread took center stage. Bakeries near Karnak Temple produced loaves in shapes from fish to fertility symbols, their wheat ground by millstones turned by prisoners of war, a stark reminder that food production was often entwined with conquest. China's markets told a different story through steam and fragrance. In Chang'an's dawn markets, vendors sold piping hot baozi stuffed with pork or red bean paste, their bamboo steamers perfuming the air alongside sizzling woks of stir-fried vegetables. But the real game changer was rice, not just as food, but as economic fuel. The Grand Canal's barges carried southern rice north to feed the capital, while tax collectors accepted payments in grain, storing it in granaries that doubled as imperial insurance against famine. And then there was tea, pressed into bricks for easy transport. It became currency along the Tibetan trade routes, where nomads traded horses for stacks of fermented pur that would mature like wine over decades. Exotic delicacies revealed the length societies would go for prestige. Roman patricians fattened dormice in terracotta jars, serving them glazed with honey and poppy seeds at feasts meant to shock as much as impress. In Persia, ice hauled from mountain peaks and stored in underground qanats cooled the sherbets of nobles, while Aztec merchants sold cocoa drinks frothy with vanilla and chili to Moctezuma's court. Even everyday foods carried hidden histories: the humble olive, pressed into oil that lit lamps across the Mediterranean, or the fig dried on Babylonian rooftops to preserve sweetness for winter. What these markets prove is that cuisine was never just survival. It was identity, diplomacy, and innovation on a plate. When a Phoenician sailor packed dates for a voyage or a Han Dynasty farmer traded millet for Sichuan peppercorns, they were participating in a system as complex as any modern supply chain. The spices that preserved meat, the grains that built cities, the fermented drinks that sealed treaties, all whisper the same truth: civilization wasn't built on grand monuments alone, but on the daily alchemy of turning soil and sweat into something shared, savored, and remembered. The bustling markets of Delos at dawn presented a chilling paradox: a sun-drenched island where the Aegean's turquoise waters lapped against docks crammed with humanity in chains. Here, under the watchful gaze of Roman auctioneers, enslaved men, women, and children stood on revolving platforms, their teeth inspected like livestock, their skills shouted to the crowd. A scribe from Alexandria, a blacksmith from Gaul. At its peak, this market could process 10,000 souls in a single day, a scale of suffering so industrialized it made Delos the Walmart of human trafficking in the ancient world. Yet what's often overlooked is how slavery wasn't just a moral failing of these societies, it was the invisible scaffolding holding up their economies. Consider the silver mines of Laurion, where Athenian slaves toiled in tunnels so narrow they could only crawl, their lungs filling with dust as they chipped ore to mint the coins that funded Pericles' Parthenon. Or the latifundia estates of Rome, where enslaved agricultural workers produced the olive oil and wine that flowed through Mediterranean trade routes. Even the parchment scholars wrote on: the marble temples tourists admire today, many were extracted, crafted, or carried by people who never tasted freedom. The Viking slave trade reveals another facet. Norse raiders didn't just take silver from Anglo-Saxon monasteries. They hauled captives to Dublin's markets, where buyers from Constantinople paid in Islamic dirhams for fair-haired servants. A single Viking trade route could see a Saxon shepherd sold in Kiev, then transported to Baghdad as a eunuch attendant. What's particularly harrowing is how slavery was bureaucratized. Pompeii's ruins preserve graffiti advertising: a healthy girl good at weaving, priced at 1,200 sesterces, the cost of 3 draft horses. Roman tax records from Egypt detail enslaved wet nurses rented out by the hour, while Mesopotamian tablets list enslaved weavers by productivity, like factory output metrics. The Code of Hammurabi even set values. A surgeon's enslaved assistant was worth 10 shekels, a miner's life just 3. This wasn't random cruelty, it was cold calculation, with human beings reduced to depreciating assets on balance sheets. Yet glimmers of resistance flicker through the darkness. The Zanj rebellion in 9th century Iraq saw East African slaves overthrow their Abbasid oppressors for 14 years, while Spartacus' revolt proved even gladiators could shake Rome to its core. Some enslaved artisans turned their skills into leverage. Athenian silver miners secretly taught each other refining techniques, making themselves too valuable to kill. And in a twist of irony, the very trade routes that transported slaves also spread abolitionist ideas. Buddhist monks traveling the Silk Road preached against bondage, while early Christian communities pooled funds to buy members' freedom. This dark chapter forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Many ancient wonders we celebrate were built on backs that never stood tall. The Great Pyramid stones, the Colosseum's arches, the spice that flavored feasts, all bore fingerprints of the unfree. Markets amplified both the best and worst of humanity. They could connect cultures through silk and ideas, but also reduce lives to commodities. As we walk through modern cities that once hosted slave markets, from Istanbul's Grand Bazaar to Charleston's old wharves, we're reminded that progress isn't inevitable. It's a choice, one every generation must make anew. The roar of a caged lion in Rome's Forum Boreum would stop even the most hardened merchant mid-haggle, a sound so alien to Italy's olive groves that its very presence spoke of empires stretched to their limits. Transporting live beasts across deserts and seas wasn't just a feat of logistics. It was a high-stakes gamble where fortunes could be lost to a capsized ship or a panicked elephant tramping through a Syrian village. Yet the demand was insatiable. Ptolemy Roman II grand procession in Alexandria featured Ethiopian cheetahs pacing on gilded leashes, Indian peacocks fanning iridescent tails, and a rhinoceros, the first seen in Europe since Roman times, hauled from the Indus Valley on a reinforced barge. These weren't mere displays of wealth, they were power made flesh, proving a ruler's reach extended beyond the known world. Behind every exotic creature lay a supply chain as intricate as any spice route. Carthaginian traders navigated Saharan oases to barter for Barbary lions, their cubs drugged with poppy milk and carried in reed cages swaying between camels. Indian mahouts escorted elephants along the Khyber Pass, their feet wrapped in hemp to prevent sores during the march to Persian royal courts. Even smaller creatures traveled vast distances, parrots from the Amazon, their wings clipped, perched on Phoenician ships crossing the Atlantic's eastern currents, while Nubian hunters netted baboons for Egyptian temples, where they'd be trained to pluck figs from offering trays. The markup was astronomical. A single white elephant from Siam could bankrupt a Greek city-state's treasury, while a talking parrot might fetch its weight in silver in Caligula's Rome. Yet the trade's darkest chapter unfolded in the Colosseum's shadow. Roman contractors maintained sprawling holding pens near Ostia's docks, where giraffes from Somalia rubbed against Scandinavian elk in a cacophony of confusion and terror. Accounts describe bears goaded onto rafts and forced to swim toward archers, or zebras harnessed to chariots to amuse crowds before their slaughter. The scale was industrial. 50,000 animals died in just 100 days of games under Trajan. But cruelty wasn't the whole story. Some beasts became celebrities. The Emperor Augustus's crocodile zoo in Rome's campus, Martius, drew crowds decades after his death, while a lynx gifted to Medicis Florence reportedly dined on porcelain plates. What's often forgotten is how these creatures shaped science and culture. Aristotle's zoological sketches relied on menagerie specimens, their strange anatomies challenging Greek notions of nature's order. A giraffe presented to China's Ming Dynasty inspired porcelain designs with swirling spotted patterns, while Moors in Iberia bred North African macaques to harvest citrus, an early example of animal labor. Even religion was transformed. Han Dynasty astronomers recorded a heavenly horse from Fergana as an astrological omen, and Mayan priests interpreted jaguar pelts traded from the lowlands as messages from the underworld gods. The legacy of this trade lingers in unexpected ways. Modern wildlife conservation maps still trace ancient trapping routes, and the genetic diversity of captive lions reveals their origins in Barbary and Mesopotamian stocks. From the obelisks carved with monkeys in Luxor to the parrot feathers adorning Tudor portraits, Humanity's obsession with the exotic reminds us that commerce has always been about more than goods. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the boundaries we cross, and the price we're willing to pay for wonder. A Greek sailor hauling an amphora onto his ship wouldn't have marveled at its curves. To him, it was just another container for olive oil. Yet today, these clay vessels are time capsules, their shapes and stamps revealing networks of trade as clearly as a modern barcode. Picture the docks of ancient Corinth, stacks of amphorae, each with a pointed base designed to wedge into ship hulls, their bellies swollen with wine from Crete or fish sauce from Spain. What's astonishing isn't just their practicality, it's how these humble jars became canvases for storytelling. A single amphora might bear scenes of Hercules wrestling the Nemean lion alongside the potter's mark, turning a shipping container into both advertisement and art. Roman glassmakers took this alchemy of form and function even further. In the workshops of Sidon, artisans blew molten silica into vessels so thin they seemed to capture light itself. A wealthy matron sipping Falernian wine from a blue glass chalice wasn't just displaying riches, she was holding a minor miracle. Glass, once rarer than gemstones, had become democratized by the 1st century BC thanks to revolutionary techniques like mold blowing. Walk through the ruins of Pompeii's marketplaces, and you'll find shop counters still embedded with round indentation sockets for displaying glass perfume bottles that once held essences from Arabia and India. The real genius lay in the branding. Potters like Cestius in southern Gaul didn't just slap their names on amphorae, they built reputations. His stamps traveled farther than he ever did, reaching Britain and the Black Sea. Archaeologists can track economic booms and busts by the spread of these signatures, like finding a Coca-Cola bottle in the Arctic. Meanwhile, glassmakers in Alexandria perfected a trick that still baffles scientists, sandwiching gold leaf between layers of clear glass to create the legendary gold glass bowls that shimmered like captured sunlight. What's often overlooked is how these objects crossed cultural boundaries. Celtic chieftains buried with Roman glassware weren't just imitating elites, they were repurposing. A wine jug might become a funerary urn, its original meaning transformed. In India, shards of Roman glass found at Arakkaimdu were melted down into bangles, blending Mediterranean craftsmanship with local tradition. Even failures tell stories. A kiln in Gaul filled with warped amphorae reveals a rainy day when humidity ruined a batch, the potter's frustration frozen in cracked clay. These everyday objects held worlds within them. The indentations on an amphora's handle might reveal the calluses of the sailor who carried it, while the wear on a glass rim could hint at generations of lips touching the same cup. From the Athenian potter painting myths on wine cups to the Syrian glassblower crafting a bride's perfume vial, these artisans didn't just make things, they made connections. When we hold their work today, we're not just touching history, we're touching the very hands that shaped it across millennia. In the shadow of Alexandria's great lighthouse, where the Mediterranean salt breeze mingled with the scent of ink and papyrus, a different kind of merchant plied his trade not in spices or silks but in words. Scrolls from Athens, bundled in linen and sealed with wax, arrived on ships alongside Egyptian grain, their contents more precious than cargo manifests could convey. Here, in the bustling stalls near the Mausian, a scholar might barter a month's wages for a treatise by Aristotle copied onto papyrus so fine it crinkled like dried leaves. But this wasn't just shopping, it was the lifeblood of an intellectual revolution. Alexandria's library, with its 500,000 scrolls, didn't merely collect knowledge, it traded it, sending agents to scour markets from Babylon to Marseille for texts on astronomy, medicine, or the whimsical comedies of Menander. The logistics of this trade were as intricate as any spice route. Papyrus, grown in the Nile's marshes, was harvested, pressed into sheets and rolled into scrolls by workshops that functioned like ancient publishing houses. A single scroll of Plato's Republic might require 20 sheets, carefully glued end to end and wrapped around cedar rods to keep the edges from fraying. But papyrus wasn't the only medium in Pergamon where Egyptian embargoes limited supply. Artisans perfected parchment from calfskin, scraped thin as onion skin and bleached until it glowed. A well-made parchment codex could last centuries, outliving empires and outlasting the libraries that housed it. Roman booksellers added another layer to this economy. In the Vicus Tuscus near the Forum, shops displayed scrolls in wooden niches labeled with tags philosophy here, epic poetry there, while literate slaves recited passages to entice wealthy patrons. Prices varied wildly. A cheap copy of Virgil's Eclogues might cost a day's wages for a laborer, while a deluxe edition with gold leaf margins could fetch a senator's annual income. The poet Martial grumbled about plagiarists selling bootleg verses, proving that intellectual property disputes are as old as literature itself. What's often forgotten is how these markets democratized ideas. A Greek physician in Antioch could study Indian Ayurvedic texts translated by Nestorian monks, while a merchant in Carthage might read a Latin summary of Chinese silk production techniques. The astronomer Ptolemy's star charts, copied and recopied in Alexandria's scriptoria, guided sailors from the Red Sea to the English Channel. Even religion traveled on these currents. Early Christian gospels spread like wildfire through the same networks that distributed Euripides' plays, their parchment pages hidden among bales of cloth to avoid imperial censors. The true legacy of these markets lies in their paradox. They commodified knowledge yet made it universal. When a fire gutted Alexandria's library, it wasn't just scrolls that burned, it was the collective bargaining of minds across continents. Yet fragments survived because a student in Rhodes had bought a copy, or a Syrian trader had tucked a text into his luggage. From the ink-stained fingers of scribes to the wax tablets of Roman schoolboys, the trade in ideas proved that the most enduring goods aren't those that fill coffers, but those that change how we see the world, one word, one scroll, one marketplace at a time. In the shadow of the Parthenon, where the scent of burning myrrh curled around marble columns, a priest might pause from his devotions to haggle over the price of sacrificial lambs, not out of greed, but because commerce and faith were threads woven from the same cloth in ancient societies. Temples across the Mediterranean and Near East functioned as divine marketplaces, their courtyards lined with stalls selling votive offerings, from tiny clay bulls for Aphrodite's altar to cedarwood amulets inscribed with prayers to Isis. In Jerusalem, the Temple Mount's outer courts buzzed with money changers converting Roman coins into temple shekels, free of the emperor's blasphemous face, and vendors selling doves for purification rituals. This wasn't sacrilege, it was sacred logistics, ensuring every pilgrim, whether a Phoenician merchant or Galilean farmer, could participate in worship. The trade in relics reveals how deeply commerce and spirituality intertwined. Long before medieval churches vied for fragments of the true cross, ancient Greeks treasured bones said to belong to heroes like Achilles, while Buddhist pilgrims carried strands of hair attributed to the Buddha along the Silk Road. In Ephesus, vendors near the Temple of Artemis sold miniature silver shrines, ancient souvenirs, to visitors seeking blessings. The line between devotion and deception often blurred. A Roman satirist joked about merchants hawking authentic feathers from the wings of Mercury, while in India, temple elephants stamped their feet on clay tablets sold as footprints of the gods. What's striking is how these markets mirrored their society's worldviews. In Egypt, where the divine infused daily life, temple workshops produced mummified ibis birds by the thousands, sold to devotees as offerings to Thoth. Maya merchants at Chichen traded jade figurines carved with the face of Kukulkan, their value rising not just from the stone's rarity, but from the belief that they channeled the serpent god's power. Even the act of selling was sanctified. Assyrian contracts invoked the gods as witnesses, and Hindu traders in Gupta-era India began transactions with mantras to Lakshmi. The legacy of these sacred marketplaces lingers in unexpected ways. The word bank traces back to Italian moneylenders' benches banch I set up near pilgrimage routes, while the Hajj's bustling stalls in Mecca continue a tradition as old as faith itself. From the incense routes of Arabia to the temple fairs of Kyoto, these spaces remind us that commerce never merely moved goods, it carried hopes, fears, and the unshakable human instinct to seek the divine in the give and take of the marketplace. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer in Hattusa wasn't just crafting tools, it was forging empires. The Hittites, masters of ironworking in the 2nd millennium BCE, guarded their techniques as closely as state secrets, turning Anatolia into the ancient world's arms factory. Their iron blades, harder and sharper than bronze, weren't just superior weapons, they were status symbols traded for gold, spices, and allegiance. A single Hittite dagger might exchange hands from a Syrian warlord to a Mycenaean mercenary, each transaction tightening the grip of those who controlled the supply. This wasn't merely commerce, it was geopolitical chess where the right sword could tilt the balance of power across continents. Meanwhile, in the misty highlands of Gaul, Celtic smiths worked magic with fire and ore. Their longswords, pattern welded with swirling layers of iron like captured lightning, were as much art as armament. Roman historians wrote of Celtic blades so finely balanced they could cleave a shield in two, a reputation that made them coveted far beyond tribal borders. Traders along the Danube carried these weapons to Scythian horsemen and Etruscan nobles, their value inflated by myth and craftsmanship. But the real innovation lay in scale. By the 1st century BC, Celtic workshops mass-produced swords and chainmail, arming entire tribes in a precursor to industrial warfare. The armor trade revealed even deeper layers of this lethal economy. A Greek hoplite's bronze cuirass, molded to his torso like a second skin, required as much skill as a sculptor's masterpiece. Workshops in Corinth turned out these masterpieces by the thousands, their surfaces etched with gorgons or gods to terrify foes. Persian markets, meanwhile, teemed with laminated linen armor, light as cloth but tough as leather, favored by charioteers from Babylon to the Indus. The markup was staggering. A single suit of Roman lorica segmentata, its overlapping plates gleaming like fish scales, cost a legionary's yearly pay. No wonder emperors kept state-owned armories under armed guard. Losing control of arms production meant risking mutiny or collapse. Rome's rise showcased the dark brilliance of weaponized markets. After conquering Spain's silver mines, they flooded Mediterranean markets with cheap denarii to bankrupt rival arms dealers. Carthaginian smiths, once suppliers to Hannibal's elephants, found themselves undersold and outmaneuvered. By the 1st century CE, Rome's military-industrial complex stretched from Syrian arrow forges to British tin mines, its supply chains as vital as its legions. When barbarian tribes later overran the empire, they did it with swords stamped with Roman steel, proof that even the mightiest could fall by the very tools they'd once monopolized. Beyond battlefields, these markets shaped cultures in unexpected ways. Viking sword hilts, inlaid with Frankish silver and Arabic coins, became walking ledgers of far-flung trade. Japanese swordsmiths folded steel not just for strength, but to create shimmering grain patterns praised in poetry. And in Africa's Sahel, the Tuaregs' legendary Takoba swords crossed the Sahara as both weapons and currency, their curved blades passing between traders and kings like lethal heirlooms. From the first bronze axe heads to the crossbows that shattered feudal hierarchies, the arms trade wasn't just about destruction. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's ingenuity, ambition, and relentless drive to secure power, one deadly masterpiece at a time. In the smoky backstreets of ancient Memphis, a physician might grind myrrh resin with honey and wine, creating a salve for wounds that modern science would later confirm had genuine antiseptic properties. This was the alchemy of ancient medicine, part practical remedy, part sacred ritual sold in market stalls that doubled as early pharmacies. The global trade in healing ingredients wove together threads of empirical knowledge and deep-rooted belief, from the opium poppies of Cyprus that dulled postoperative pain to the ginger root shipped from India to settle queasy stomachs after lavish Roman feasts. What's fascinating isn't just what they traded, but how these remedies traveled. Dried mandrake roots from Palestine wrapped in damp cloth to preserve their human-like shape, or vials of Assyrian castor oil stoppered with beeswax to prevent leaks along caravan routes. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, didn't just diagnose illnesses, he was a savvy importer. His texts list over 300 medicinal plants, many sourced from distant markets, licorice from Scythia for coughs, saffron from Crete for melancholy, and sesame oil from Egypt as a base for ointments. His contemporary, the Greek herbalist Diocles, even wrote a guide to counterfeit detection after noticing shady dealers adulterating precious cinnamon with cheaper tree bark. Meanwhile, in China's bustling Chang'an markets, apothecaries prescribed ginseng dug from Manchuria's mountains at prices rivaling silver, while rhino horn ground into powders believed to reduce fevers arrived on ships from Vietnam, its value inflated by rarity and myth. The line between science and superstition was often blurred. Babylonian healers sold magnetic lodestones to draw out evil spirits, while Egyptian physicians prescribed fried mouse paste for toothaches. Yet amid the quackery lay startling advances. Mesopotamian clay tablets detail wound dressings using turmeric and beer, a combination now known to have anti-inflammatory properties. The Roman army's medics carried vinegar-soaked bandages, unwittingly harnessing acetic acid's antibacterial power, while the Ebers papyrus from 1500 BC lists willow bark teas for pain relief, millennia before aspirin synthesis. Trade routes became conduits for medical cross-pollination. When Alexander the Great's armies reached India, they brought back not just loot but Ayurvedic knowledge of turmeric and black pepper as digestive aids. Arab traders later refined these ideas, establishing bazaars in Baghdad where Persian physicians sold syrups of rosewater and senna pods alongside manuals translated from Greek and Sanskrit. The Silk Road's greatest gift might have been its role as an early clinical trial network. Monks in Dunhuang caves recorded which Tibetan snow lotus varieties eased altitude sickness, while Persian caravanserais served as way stations to test which ginger strains best survived long journeys without losing potency. Perhaps the most poignant legacy of these ancient pharmacies is their reminder that healing has always been a universal language. A Phoenician sailor's pouch of garlic to ward off scurvy, a Tang dynasty noble's jade vial of asthma-relieving ephedra, a Gaulish warrior's pouch of yarrow leaves to staunch battle wounds, all spoke to the same hope that somewhere in the cacophony of the marketplace lay the secret to cheating suffering, if only for a little while. The Phoenician merchant clinging to the mast of his galley wasn't just sailing the Mediterranean, he was threading a needle between waves and empires. These master shipbuilders crafted vessels so revolutionary, their designs still echo in modern hulls. Their secret, cedar from Lebanon's mountains, split into planks so tightly fitted they needed no nails, just waterproof seams of bitumen. A single Phoenician ship could haul 500 amphorae of wine, their bellies weighted with tin from Cornwall and amber from the Baltic, all while outrunning pirates and storms. This wasn't just transport, it was high-stakes alchemy, turning wind and timber into wealth. Across the sands of Central Asia, another beast of burden redefined distance. The Bactrian camel, with its shaggy coat and double humps storing fat like biological fuel tanks, could trek for weeks without water, carrying 400 pounds of silk or spices where no cart could roll. Persian caravanserais, spaced a day's march apart, became the ancient world's truck stops, offering fodder, repairs, and even veterinary care for exhausted camels. The real genius lay in the saddle, a wooden frame distributing weight evenly, allowing these ships of the desert to traverse the Taklamakan's shifting dunes without sinking. Rome's engineers took land transport to another level. Their roads layered with crushed stone, mortar, and volcanic ash were so durable, some still bear traffic today. A messenger on the Via Appia could gallop from Rome to Brundisium in 7 days, relaying orders that moved legions like chess pieces. But the unsung heroes were the ox carts, their wide-rimmed wheels designed to grip stone pavements, hauling Egyptian grain to feed 1 million mouths. Innovation often came from unexpected places. The Latin sail, borrowed from Arab dhow ships, allowed vessels to tack against the wind, while the Chinese wheelbarrow, introduced to Europe centuries later, let one man move loads that once required 3. Even ice became a commodity. Norse traders packed Swedish glacier ice in sawdust, delivering it to Byzantine palaces where chefs crafted snow-chilled desserts. What these pioneers understood was that trade wasn't just about goods, it was about motion. From the monsoon-driven voyages of Indian merchants to the Incas' relay runners speeding messages along mountain trails, every advancement shrank the world a little more. The next time you see a shipping container or a highway truck, remember, its ancestors were camels plodding under stars and sails straining against the horizon, all part of humanity's oldest quest to bridge the spaces between us. Athens' bustling Agora didn't just run on trust, it ran on vigilance. Picture this: a merchant weighing olives on a bronze scale suddenly finds his wrist gripped by a metronomos, one of the city's market inspectors. This official wasn't just checking for honest weights. He carried a set of standardized lead discs to test every scale in the marketplace. Get caught shaving coins or watering down wine, and you'd face more than a slap on the wrist. Fines were steep, and repeat offenders could be banned from trading altogether, a death sentence for a merchant's livelihood. But Athens wasn't alone in its obsession with fairness. Over in Han Dynasty China, Emperor Wu's reforms introduced coins with precisely measured edges, making it impossible to clip silver without detection. His mints even added serial numbers, an ancient version of anti-counterfeiting tech. The Mesopotamians took it further. Hammurabi's code, etched into that famous basalt steel, spelled out consequences with brutal clarity. A tavern keeper caught overcharging for beer, drowning in the river. A builder whose shoddy house collapsed and killed the owner, execution. While these punishments seem draconian today, they reflected a universal truth. Markets only thrived when people believed the system was rigged in favor of honesty, not deceit. Even the Aztecs had their own version of the FDA. Inspectors patrolled Tlatelolco stalls, tossing spoiled maize into canals and fining butchers who tried to pass off old meat as fresh. What's fascinating is how these regulations crossed cultural lines. Roman aediles didn't just organize gladiator games, they enforced price ceilings on grain during shortages, punishing hoarders with public floggings. In India, the Arthashastra, a kind of ancient economic playbook, prescribed finger amputations for counterfeiters, while also setting wage minimums for weavers and potters. These weren't arbitrary cruelties, they were calculated efforts to maintain social cohesion. When a drought struck, a single merchant hoarding barley could spark riots. So societies learned the hard way that markets needed guardrails. Yet for all their severity, these systems had surprising nuance. Egyptian tax collectors accepted payments in grain, oil, or linen, adjusting rates based on Nile flood levels. Viking thing assemblies resolved trade disputes with witness testimony and oath swearing, a precursor to modern courts. And in the bustling ports of the Islamic Golden Age, Mu'tazib inspectors monitored everything from bread weight to pharmacist qualifications, armed with manuals detailing fair profit margins for hundreds of goods. The real lesson: ancient regulators understood something we often forget, that trust is the ultimate currency. When a shopper in Babylon could buy a jar of honey without fearing it was diluted, or a silk trader in Chang'an knew his coins wouldn't be rejected for being underweight, commerce didn't just survive, it flourished. From the lead weights of Athens to the stamped coins of China, these early attempts at consumer protection reveal a timeless truth. The best markets aren't the wildest ones, but the ones where everyone agrees to play by the same rules. Imagine trading a sack of grain for a pair of sandals, only to realize the cobbler doesn't need wheat this season. This was the daily frustration of barter economies. In ancient Mesopotamia, a farmer might swap dates for wool, while a potter exchanged bowls for fish, creating a tangled web of negotiations where values shifted with every handshake. But necessity bred ingenuity. Societies began anchoring trade to tangible benchmarks. Sumerians used silver by weight, Egyptians measured goods in deben of copper, and Pacific Islanders strung cowrie shells into necklaces that doubled as currency. These weren't just commodities, they were stepping stones toward an idea that would revolutionize commerce: universal value, portable and unchanging. Then came the Lydians, lounging beside the Pactolus River where gold flecks shimmered in the shallows. Around 600 BC, their king stamped electrum nuggets with a lion's snarling visage, guaranteeing purity and weight. These first coins weren't merely pretty metal, they were tiny contracts declaring, "This piece is worth what I say it is." Suddenly, a merchant in Sardis could pocket a day's earnings without hauling livestock, and soldiers received wages instead of sacks of barley. The concept spread like wildfire. Greek city-states minted drachmas adorned with owls, Persian darics bore the image of a running king, and Roman denarii showcased gods and emperors, turning pockets into miniature galleries of political propaganda. China, ever the innovator, leapfrogged metal altogether when Tang dynasty merchants grew weary of carting strings of heavy coins. By the 8th century, they'd pioneered flying money, paper certificates backed by imperial warehouses. A trader in Sichuan could deposit cash and walk away with a slip redeemable in Chang'an, a system so efficient it baffled Marco Polo centuries later. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Aztec markets buzzed with a sweeter currency, cocoa beans. These weren't just for drinking, they were small change for tomatoes or stacked into sacks to buy a slave's freedom. Counterfeiters risked gruesome penalties for passing hollow beans filled with mud. What's mesmerizing is how each system mirrored its society's soul. Viking hoards brimmed with hacked silver bracelets and ingots chopped into spendable bits, reflecting a culture that valued function over form. The Yapes of Micronesia carved limestone discs taller than a man, their worth cemented by communal memory of who hauled them across oceans. Even the abstract found footing. Incan Kipu knots recorded debts in colorful threads, while Fijian whale teeth became ceremonial currency, exchanged at weddings like living heirlooms. The true breakthrough wasn't the coins or the cocoa, it was trust codified. When Alexander the Great standardized currency across his empire, he wasn't just simplifying trade, he was weaving disparate cultures into a single economic tapestry. From the clinking of Lydia's first lions to the rustle of Song dynasty banknotes, humanity kept reinventing one idea: that value isn't in the object, but in the collective belief that it matters. Ancient markets weren't just stages for haggling over spices and silks. They were the original social networks, humming with more than commerce. Think of the Silk Road not as a single path, but as a sprawling conversation stretching from Chang'an to Rome, where a Persian merchant might explain the stars to a Chinese scholar while Tibetan monks debated philosophy over cups of fermented mare's milk. These were places where a Greek physician could learn suturing techniques from an Indian surgeon, or where a Maya trader might swap cocoa beans for a sheet of beaten copper, each transaction quietly stitching together the fabric of human progress. What's astonishing isn't just the scale of these exchanges, but their intimacy. A single shipwreck off the coast of Turkey, the Uluburun, reveals a microcosm of this world. Cypriot copper ingots stacked beside Egyptian gold, Mycenaean pottery nestled next to Baltic amber. This wasn't a royal hoard, it was a working cargo, proof that even ordinary merchants thought globally. The real magic lay in the unintended consequences: Babylonian math influencing Mayan calendars, African okra seeds taking root in Indian soil, Roman glass beads surfacing in Japanese tombs. Markets didn't just move goods, they blurred borders long before the word globalization existed. The legacy of these exchanges pulses through our daily lives in ways we rarely notice. That morning coffee, its ancestors were chewed as berries by Ethiopian herders before Yemeni traders boiled them into kisha, the numbers on your screen. They traveled from Indian mathematicians to Arab scholars, then hitched a ride to Europe on the abacuses of Italian merchants. Even something as simple as a wheelbarrow, a Chinese invention that revolutionized medieval European construction, shows how ancient marketplaces were engines of practical innovation, not just luxury. Yet for all their grandeur, these hubs thrived on something fragile: trust. A Phoenician sailor might never meet the miner whose tin he carried, but he relied on the miner's honesty about purity. A Silk Road caravan leader trusted that the next oasis hadn't vanished since last season's maps were drawn. This delicate web of faith, woven across deserts and oceans, reminds us that commerce has always been a leap of faith, one that required cultures to see each other not as strangers but as partners. So the next time you swipe a credit card or haggle at a flea market, remember you're participating in a ritual older than pyramids. The stalls of Trajan's market may lie in ruins, but their spirit lives on in the vibrant chaos of a Tokyo fish auction, the rhythmic chants of a Moroccan souk, or even the digital glow of an online marketplace. What began with barley shekels and cuneiform receipts has evolved, but the essence remains. Every transaction, no matter how small, is a thread in the vast, invisible tapestry connecting us all. If you've enjoyed this journey through the bazaars of time, tap that like button. It's the modern equivalent of sealing a deal with a handshake. And don't forget to subscribe. Consider it your invitation to the next caravan of stories waiting just over the horizon. Until then, keep exploring, because history's greatest markets weren't just places to buy and sell, but invitations to one